Good morning to the Caron YouTube audience. And my name is Reverend Jack, and I'm the Senior Director of Spiritual Care at Caron. And I also have an in-person audience for the chapel service today. Delighted to have those of you on YouTube and in person and on live stream with us. And I keep debating with myself where to start. So I stand in this place as a recipient of a gift that was passed on to me, and I was taught that the gift that was passed on to me I owe to two gentlemen, Bill and Bob. If those of you who are 12-step literate know the Bill and Bob I'm talking about, the Alcoholics Anonymous movement started in 1935 with these two fellows and has spread around the world, and its ripples include this very place and structure, and things like later this morning you'll hear a reading from a tradition called Recovery Dharma, which is not directly in the 12-step lineage, but it certainly is present here in the United States, partly as a legacy gift from the Bill and Bob splash into the universe. And I also stand here not only as a person in long-term recovery and so wanting to give tribute to Bill and Bob, but as a person who started as an atheist and in my recovery was moved to explore questions of spirituality and faith and became ordained and then became a chaplain, and then in becoming a chaplain I sought training about how to become a servant to other people in addiction recovery. And so I learned about two people who are patrons of the chaplaincy movement. And this is a lot more esoteric than my guess is the two people I'm now thinking about. Basically, no one in the room except maybe our spiritual care intern Jim would be learning about. But there's two gentlemen. One was a guy named Richard Cabot, and another was a fellow named Anton Boysen. And Richard Cabot and Anton Boysen are thought of as the sort of principal founders in the early 20th century of modern clinical chaplaincy. And so they were both odd people, as Bill and Bob were each odd people, and my guess is you are odd people. I'm an odd person. People are unique, and I think quite fascinating and interesting. And one of the ways that you can look at Richard Cabot and Anton Boysen and sort of categorize each of their gifts to modern clinical chaplaincy is that Richard Cabot was a guy who thought of the science of chaplaincy, and Anton Boysen was a guy who thought of the art of chaplaincy. And my guess is if you think about that, you could probably draw some conclusions quickly, which would maybe not be terribly wrong. But Richard Cabot will say, you need to learn these things, and these are the kind of skills and methods, and this is how to do it right. And Anton Boysen was like, just jump in there and have an experience. And that was one of the things that Anton Boysen I think brought very beautifully to the training of chaplains. My mentor here, Father Bill Holtberg, although he never really studied Cabot and Boysen, but Father Bill was definitely a Boysen fellow. As a military chaplain and then an addiction chaplain, he was a person for whom encounter was the essence of what he did. And he used to talk about intensive encounter as a training he had had. And there's a phrase that I have in my scheduled topics for chapel, which is a phrase that comes from Anton Boysen, who viewed my work as art more than science. And the Anton Boysen phrase that is in my head as I want to bring a theme for my message for today is that Anton Boysen viewed the work of a chaplain, not just in addiction, but basically like in a hospital or hospice or in the battlefield or on campus ministry or whatever, as recovery of soul. That was his expression, that you were helping people recover. And there's a whole bunch of implications that are there. So I was trying to think, how can I talk to you today about recovery of soul? And I thought and prayed about that all this week. And it was on my heart to share with you a story I haven't told in a long time. But to me, it has something, the question of the soul is a perennial question. And it's one that's hotly debated in various circles. Interestingly, right now, there's a movement in trauma work towards embracing the idea of the soul and this idea of what they call in trauma psychology, soul injury. That traumas experienced wound a person in a way that is a soul injury. And I'm not going to solve all the questions about soul in my homily this morning, but I want to leap into the fray with it, and I want to do that with a personal story. So, and I just heard this in yesterday's meeting, which I'm going to steal. So, a guy was celebrating 34 years, and he said he's also a member of On and On and On. So, that's one of my failings. I'm a member of On and On and On, and so I'm going to try and be concise with my story. But this story is about a brother of mine. His name was Steve. Steve passed away in 2017. And it's about the very days before he died. So Steve was just shy of 2 years older than me, like 23 months older than me. And he and I had a tough history together. I suspect as children and infants and in our childhood, I do remember us being pals, but I also remember us scrapping a lot. So in other words, I don't think it was even ever like idealistically wonderful, oh, he was my best buddy and I was his best buddy, although I think it was a period of time that was not conflictual. But unfortunately in our teens, there was a major Jack-Steve rift. And there was a period of time when I wanted nothing to do with him and he wanted nothing to do with me. And we kind of went our separate ways. And part of that was just like Cabot and Boyson or Bill and Bob. He and I were in some ways oil and water, but I wanted to be like compete on his playing field and he wanted to compete on mine, and it didn't work. And so, we were clashed, and then we were like, forget you, excuse me, I'm going to try not to laugh this morning. And so Steve and I were apart for a long time, and then I got sober, which was an amazing thing for me to have happen in my life. And later on in my journey to sobriety, Steve would join other members of our family in embarking on a 12-step recovery journey, and he would get sober. And although I did reach out to Steve for amends early in my recovery, it didn't really repair the bridge. What really repaired the bridge for my brother and I was when both of us were in a 12-step program. And so all of a sudden, when I was like 33 and had been sober a number of years, and Steve was new in his recovery, and we did our mutual amends to one another, we started becoming friends. We were friends as adults. And we had shared our family experience as children, but I'm sure you come from a perfect family. Mine was complicated. And I now, like years later, with both my parents deceased and two of my siblings gone and a lot of water over the dam, I realized that it's not fair for me to characterize my family in a one-brush way. It's either totally sick or totally wonderful, because neither of those is true. Like, my family had wonderful things about it. My parents did the very best they could, and they were really cool and interesting people, but they suffered from the same illness that puts you in these chairs here and that I suffered from, and it complicated our relational life. So we were not very good at relationship, that's what I will say. I don't think we were very skillful in relationship in the Abel family. And I think that's often true of families that are affected by the disease of addiction. That I think addiction is essentially a kind of, can be thought of as a relational ill health. It's a malattachment that we form because we don't do attachment especially well, people to people. And so, Johnny Walker, my best friend, like that's kind of where that lands. So anyway, I'm going to get back to the Steve story and be careful of the on and on. So Steve and I reconnected as adults, and in June of 2017, we had gotten close enough, which was a very rare instance, but it's a really important piece of data, that my new bride, Judy, and I connected with my brother Steve and his wife Evelyn and went to see a concert together. We got hotel rooms in the same hotel, and we had like a double date night. And it was awesome. It was like, and I would have had no idea that would have been one of my last opportunities to really be out in the world and play with Steve. But it turns out that it would be, because I think that concert was in June, and on August 6th of 2017, I was grilling for my stepson's birthday, and my wife came out from the house and she said, "Jack, you need to get on the phone." And I'm like, I'm in the middle of steaks, whatever, and she's like, "No, you need to get on the phone now." And what had happened was that Steve had been motorcycling with AA buddies, and a deer had jumped in front of him. And he had been in a tragic, very, very serious motorcycle accident, had been airlifted to a trauma hospital in Winchester, Virginia, which was not where he was from. He was several hours from home. And so over the next 13 days, I just realized that I was driving up this morning, I was counting, and I can't believe it was only 13 days because it feels like it was 2 months. But for 13 days, from August 6th to August 19th, Steve was in an intensive care unit, non-responsive, intubated, and we were learning as a family about brain injury, and also they had done all this orthopedic surgeries, and so there was a whole discussion about even whether his body would heal, but then there was a question about whether his brain would heal or not. And there's a thing called the GCS, the Glasgow Coma Scale. If you know about it, I feel bad for you, but anyway, it's a measure of people's responsiveness. You are probably about a 15 on the GCS, and Steve's measure was about a 4, which means like at least his heart was beating and all sorts of, he's basically non-responsive. And it was awful, and it was too far away, it was inconvenient. Of course, Evelyn started camping out in Winchester, Virginia, but I would drive down there from here, and my wife, who is permanently in Delaware, would go over and meet me over there, and other members of our family would try and pop in and out, and it was this miserable period of time in which we were trying to attend to Steve. And thank God for the people in that ICU. They were just amazing. The chaplain was awful, but there was a nurse there. Her name was Allison, and she was, for me, she was our chaplain, and she was incredible. And I need to move the story along. So on the 19th of August, we had planned to get all the members of the family together because we had come to learn about a thing called diffuse axonal injury, which is a neuro term for a kind of brain injury where the shearing of the tissues of the brain is so severe that the probability of brain repair is basically 0. And so we were told essentially Steve was never going to really recover. I have a friend who's a neurosurgeon in recovery, and I was talking to him, and he was giving me some guidance. And we were iPhone photoing the scans and sending them to my buddy Ray. And Ray was really helpful in talking to us about the harsh reality of it. And one of the things I knew very clearly, and my brother had made very clear to his wife and his kids, was that he did not want to be in a long-term care situation if he could not function on his own. And so on the 19th of August was the day we decided we were going to extubate Steve, but we were going to have a final medical conference so everybody could weigh in, and if somebody wanted to say, no, let's leave Steve on a trach and move him into long-term care because we'll wait for a miracle or whatever. But I knew in my heart what was going to happen, and I had talked to other members of the family, so I knew that was the day. We were there to make this decision and then extubate Steve and see if he would pass away immediately or how long, because they weren't even sure his heart would continue beating without the mechanically supported respiration. And so I'm in the ICU, I'm talking to the ICU nurse. My wife is right next to me. Steve's in the bed. They've kind of cleaned him up. They've shaved him and they've taken the whiplash collar off of him to make him slightly more presentable and accessible for us as a family. And my sister-in-law, Evelyn, is over on the other side of the room with Steve's 2 kids, Derek and Sandra. Beautiful, beautiful people. And my wife, Judy, elbows me. And I had heard that there had been moments when Steve would open his eyes. And I had not been present when there had been a moment when Steve would open his eyes. But the sadness was, of course, when Steve would open his eyes, they were like, it probably doesn't mean anything because it's just some weird neurological tick. And it does not appear that his eyes would track or anything. So Judy elbows me and she goes, look, his eyes are open. And I looked around the room and nobody else was feeling moved to go over since Steve's eyes were open. And so I remember this so vividly, it was like it was yesterday. I went over and I kneeled on the hard tile floor to try and position myself so I could look up into his eyes, which were kind of downcast because of the way, without the whiplash collar, his head was sloping. And I went looking for my brother. And I knew I needed a moment with him, and I had a feeling of total privacy. I do know that Judy was there, and she was still talking to the nurse, and I know that Evelyn, Derek, and Sandra were off on the other side, but I suddenly was like, it was just me and him. And I started saying the things that I wanted to say. So I was like, I love you, and it's okay, and I'm so sorry for all the crap that got in between us, but you're awesome, and I love you, and it's okay. You can leave. I'll try to be there for your kids. Like, your work is done. You're a great brother. All those things that I wish I could have a chance to say. And there's something that happened in this moment that I want to tell you about, but I realize it's going to be hard for me to put into words because it has nothing to do with words. Because I think what I was hoping for, this is my daytime soap opera fantasy, was that Steve would squeeze my hand, or he would wink, or that I would get some sort of cognitive, I am here with you. But instead, something happened in me that was so very, very much an experience I had. And yet it took me the rest of the day to begin to process it. And that night I journaled and I wrote a long essay, which every once in a while I have shared with people. And I'm speaking to you from essentially the text of that essay about what I was the best words I could put to what I felt like happened. Was that I went to find my adult brother, who had been my person I had reconciled with in my sobriety. But what happened to me was that those eyes that were looking back at me had the same distance from them in the nose and the same as the eyes of my infant brother when I was in a crib and he was my not quite crib mate. And neither of us knew words, or he knew words and I didn't know words. So it was a pre-verbal, pre-cognitive relationship. And when you looked at the brain scans, you could see that much of his brain, pockets here and there, were totally offline, but there were also plenty of chunks of his brain that looked like they were probably functioning. And so my story was, well, there's still a Steve in there, and those parts of his brain that are not able, but he can't string together language, and he can't even manage eye movement or whatever. But what happened to me was I felt a sense of connectedness as an infant to an infant, rather than as a talking, thinking adult being to a talking, thinking adult being. And it was profoundly healing for me, and it was overwhelmingly loving. Because all of a sudden, all that crap of the 30-some years of my existence and his existence with me, and all the stuff that we had thrown at each other, and blame and shame and attribution and competition, and all of the mistakes that we had made were stripped away. And this was my little big brother, and I was his little brother. And I just did the best I could to keep him there. I don't know if you get what I'm saying, but it's against the backdrop of that experience that I want to tell you that I struggle with what it means to say there is a soul, but I totally believe, I'm sorry, that there is something that is soulful about human beings. And people who are like, oh, it's all Skinnerian behavioralist crap or whatever. I'm like, no. Love is real, and there is something about relationship, and meaning means something. Life is not meaningless, and it is important. And if you are a parent who has had a baby, you know that there's an attachment that forges itself. And if you are a twin, you know that you have a tie between the one twin and the other that is weird and intense. And philosophers who get lost in this solipsism, I don't even know if you exist. Come on! Human beings are extraordinary and miraculous instances of this phenomenon of being. And you are one, and I am one. And what I want to say is that when you end up at Caron, something, Father Bill used to say this all the time. He used to say, and I always struggled with the way he said it, but he was like, other diseases attack the mind or the body, but this disease attacks the soul. That was his thing. And now here I am saying it because I believe he's onto something. This illness rips apart the fabric of our relational lives. It takes apart marriages. It takes apart families. It takes human beings away from themselves. I had a session this week with somebody that was so amazing to me because it was really illuminating and clear to me that this person not only struggled with a relationship with other people, but struggled with a relationship with himself. And try to add a God figure in the equation when when stuff happens. This is a place where people have soul wounds of the highest order. And one of the sad truths about what happens when you come to treatment because you get coerced or forced or you watch Sandra Bullock movies or whatever is that you come here and you think it's spa treatment or it's like Botox or whatever. And it is not, that is not the scope and depth of what is supposed to be happening here. What we are here to do, and I have friends over there, April and Claire, it's awesome to see you here, and I have Jim here working with me and Marty. We come in here every week not to tweak your eyebrows, but to help you find again who the hell you are. Because you have somehow gone away from that. And if you don't see it, take a hard look in the mirror and do what I did with my brother and try and find that person. The urgency, it could not be higher. And when people leave here, they drink and die, their marriages implode, their jobs fizzle away, their friendships erode, and they take their own lives, or they shoot fentanyl because they don't know it's fentanyl, when the miracle of recovery of soul is not initiated. But the good news is that soul retrieval happens here on a routine basis. This is a place where the extraordinary is ordinary. It's one of the things I love about working here is that when I worked in an ordinary church, which wasn't even an ordinary church, like I said in my announcements, it was the land of the Misfit Toys Church, but even in the Misfit Toys Church, it was the exceptional person who we had who went from death to life, from blind to sight, from captivity to freedom, from sickness to health. It was a rare thing. It is the order of the day here. We have people here who are lost, who are not on the GCS scale, but on the soul awakeness scale, are 4s and go to 12s. We have people who come alive and like suddenly realize, oh my God, what happened to me? Where did I go? And I want to beg you to set your hopes and dreams on that. Not on like, I'm going to cut down and keep smoking weed. Really? Let me count for you the number of the dead. Are you placing that as important in your life over love? Sorry, a little preachy today.
But you're not usually, so we'll take it. It's okay.
This is a place where the lost are found. This is a place where the blind get sight. This is a place where the lame walk, where the prison are free. This is where this happens. And unfortunately, there's a small subset of people who come in here relatively clueless to it and leave bitching because of the tomato soup. By the way, you're not here for the soup. So, I wanted to put the real agenda in front of us today. And I didn't know any other better way to do it than to tell you about when my brother came and found me and I thought I was going to find you. And I do think the mirror exercise is really powerful. I would encourage you to try that if you are not yet at home in this new beginning. Spend some time looking eye to eye with yourself in the mirror. It can be really challenging if you're filled with shame. But that's where this begins. You can do your own soul retrieval. And then let us help. Whatever you see staring back at you, let us know. And people like Claire, April, Jim, and I, and other members of the clinical teams, John Reese back there, there's amazing people here who can help you. And Kristen. So I'm excited to welcome you home to yourself and invite you to go on a hunt for that precious prize of your own integrity, identity, and worth. Because it's there, and you are people of infinite value. And it's time to come home. Thanks.